think we had a very, very candid and very well traversed talk by Ambassador Haqqani. Floor is open now for discussion.
Well, Ambassador, excellent talk, short and brief. And you had been asking, there is a young crowd here, may not be in the tune with what is existed before and now. I have seen 15 years of my life in British days. In the eastern sector, I want to make my position a little clear. And we had to leave in October 46 in today's Bangladesh and come. And my wife comes from Peshawar, who came this side, and it is this place that we met and married. But I want to tell you, you said there is no permanent friends or no permanent foes. Yes, there is permanent friends, no permanent foes, but there is permanent interest. Now coming to the way we look at it, for some time I was also on the dancing mood. I was president of the Pakistan-India People's Forum for Peace and Democracy, which I could manage to hand over to Mr. Kodandamaya. I have got one or two points that unless Pakistan army is reined in, the point of relationship, there is a hitch in that. The situation like this, that in our residence we keep a watchman to protect us. One day he enters and says, sorry, this is my house, you go. And this, once army gets in, it is really very, very difficult to get out of it. I can understand that. So is there any possibility someday so that we are aware with your experience and all that yes, someday it may change? That's about all.
As I understand your question, it's about whether Pakistan's military will ever fully relinquish policy-making control, especially in the area of national security policy. All I would say is that we are not at that point now, but we will be at that point someday. It's not a predictable course, but there are many other countries. I mean, I had earlier cited South Korea. Please remember, South Korea was a nation of several coups with several military generals running the country. And the country made the transition to democracy. And I think now, even their intelligence apparatus is no longer controlled by the military. The civilians control the intelligence apparatus. The Korean CIA is headed usually by an academic now. So things have changed. It will take tremendous effort in case of Pakistan to get there. But we can get there. And look, when President Zardari was elected president and Prime Minister Gilani became Prime Minister, you will remember that in that 5-year period, so many times people predicted the army is about to take over, but it did not. My view is it could not. Because one of the things that has happened is that although the Pakistan military manages to control the national discourse and narrative, it's still not able to take over anymore, because the average person says, I have interests that are better served by having civilian representatives. In 1947, what is today Pakistan had a literacy rate of 16%. What is today India? Had a literacy rate of 18%. It was a 2% difference. Today, Pakistan's literacy rate is 58%. India's is 78%. So the 2% difference has become a 20% difference. 42% of school-going age children between the age of 5 and 15 in Pakistan do not go to school. Now I know many of you probably feel like we sometimes do about the status of your schools, etc. I'm sure some of you say, oh, those schools, they're not as good anyway. But you do have more than 90% school enrollment now in India. Bangladesh also has more than 90%. Pakistan's school enrollment hovers at 56, 57, 58%. So the average Pakistani who in the 1950s and 60s and even in the 70s could be told that, you know, you have to stand by your country's army, now says, yeah, I want to stand by my country's army, but I don't want them to rule me. And that is already a change. Now, does that mean Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif can totally ignore the advice and counsel and direction in some cases of the generals? No, he can't. Even the Pakistani media often follows instructions and lines that come from Pakistan's military intelligence or ISI or ISPR. But there are contending voices. So will this contention settle in a different direction a few years later? I am hopeful that it can. Can I say with any definiteness that it will? No, I cannot. Such things have their own dynamic. But very frankly, the space for Ayub Khan kind of governance is shrinking. American laws forbid assistance, for example, to a country, and economic loans and stuff like that. Everything gets stopped. Furthermore, when Ayub Khan took over power in 1958, coups were fashionable. When General Ziaul Haq took over in 1977, 2/3 of the world was ruled by military dictators or coup makers. 2/3. Today, there are hardly any countries left that still have military dictators of that kind. So I think that the process has started, but has the process reached some kind of a conclusive stage? No, it hasn't. The military still remains the single most influential and powerful institution in Pakistan. Yes, sir.
Can we come back to you?
Your idea of the great leap forward is excellent. What prevents India and Pakistan, in that context, great leap forward, sitting across the table and sign an agreement accepting the present LOC as permanent border? Cannot be that a great leap forward?
Again, that would that would imply that Pakistan gives up its position, and it would be seen as Pakistan, from the Pakistani point of view, it would be Pakistan's defeat, India's victory. So the solution is not to go that road. The solution is to move forward on other things, get on with life.
Okay.
And that is a more pragmatic and practical approach, because again, that attempt to try and solve the problem, all the married couples in this room would agree with me that if you always tried to resolve every dispute between you, you'd be divorced within 3-4 years of marriage, if not 2. Sometimes you try to live together and say, okay, I don't like this, I don't agree with this, but. So this is how this has to move forward, instead of making one side feel that it has lost and the other side. The great leap forward is what Vajpayee tried to attempt, and Nawaz Sharif, which was undermined by Kargil. That was a great leap forward attempt. That, okay, we have both tested nuclear weapons, now let's go and try and do that.
One more question. You have written a book called Between Military and Mosque. I am a critic of all religions in the world, okay? Can ever Pakistan get salvation from these two forces?
This one is an easy one for me to answer. I think I've answered it in my book also, but right now I'll just answer it in one word: no. I think that modern statecraft cannot be run on the base of religious prejudice. I will repeat that sentence. Modern statecraft simply cannot be maintained or run on the basis of religious prejudice. Whether it's India or whether it's Pakistan or whether it's any of the Middle Eastern countries. The business of the state should be based on pragmatic considerations, not on the basis of religious or even other ideologies. I mean, look, even non-religious ideologies. China. China is having one of the most prosperous times of its history. And how have they achieved that prosperity? Not through their own ideology. It's a unique country. It's one of the world's fastest growing capitalist economy under a communist party rule. But that is pragmatism. And I think both India and Pakistan need to embrace pragmatism rather than ideological nationalism. And in case of Pakistan, I have gone out on a limb and said Pakistan needs to... Look, 97% of Pakistanis are Muslims. That's not going to change. Some will be practicing, some will be non-practicing. Some will be more pious, some will be less pious. But an individual can be pious. A society can be religious. But a state must be secular. Individual can be pious, society can be religious, but the state must be secular. And that is the way forward for all countries, including Pakistan.
Ambassador Haqqani, I appreciate what you said about the Great Leap. Would you share your views on what would be the key elements of that Great Leap that you think will make a new paradigm in Indo-Pakistan relationship?
I think, first of all, there has to be an agreement that basically freezes disputes. An agreement not to, what we've had is, we don't talk about it, but for example, Pakistan continues to raise the issue of Kashmir. India continues to raise some other. Basically, it's about, these are things which we cannot resolve right now. And then we start normalization. Demilitarization, for example, of our of the line of control and our shared borders. Some kind of negotiations that will bring both countries under international restraint regimes on the nuclear field. Pakistan's nuclear program is under no international restraint regime. You also have only, based on your bilateral agreement with the United States, you have some international one. Then exchanges. I mean, it's amazing how little, except Bollywood, there is very little connection for the ordinary Pakistani with what goes on in India. I was just talking to some students earlier and I said, I would love for you, one of you, to make it your assignment that 1 week you will only watch Pakistani television news channels to figure out what is shaping the mind there. And the news is essentially, I mean, for example, this poll I cited about China has not been reported in Pakistan. They should have had many, many discussions there. What's happened? 30% China. Saudi Arabia are not positive. Many of our friends are no longer positive about us. They don't. So that creates a artificial bubble. That needs to be broken. I have been seeking news. You know that Indian newspapers cannot be, you can't buy an Indian newspaper in Pakistan. I don't think a Pakistani newspaper is readily available. Okay, so the internet has changed things considerably. But as neighbors, we should be knowing a lot more about each other. And the economic interaction has to open completely. And very frankly, I would say that should go as far as Pakistan is a investment deficit country right now. Pakistan should welcome Indian investors. It would make tremendous economic sense. Just to give you one example, if Pakistan wants to open itself for tourism, who do you think would be the logical investors in Pakistan in the hotel industry? It's not going to be Hilton. It's not going to be Sheraton. It would make more sense for Pakistan to have investment from Taj and Oberoi and groups like that, because it would fit in their economic paradigm much more readily and easily. Then there are many little things. I mean, I remember once Pakistan had a shortage of green chilies, and our Ministry of Agriculture, I used to sit in cabinet meetings at that time, and the Ministry of Agriculture said, we have a shortage of green chilies, we need to import them. We suggest that we import them from Myanmar. I raised my hand and I said, what's the situation with India? They said, well, India has a supply of green chilies, they could sell them to us. But do we want to buy green chilies from India? Even though that would be cheaper, they could come by train, they would come quicker, etc. So it's that similarly cement. Pakistan has an overcapacity of cement production. We installed capacity for cement, and our own demand is not that much. You guys, every time I come to any Indian city, you have this whole infrastructure investment coming up. You will need cement. Putting it on trains from Pakistan and bringing it here would be cheaper than bringing it from South Korea, which is the other country which will be able to supply you cement. So why not do all of these things? Similarly, if a man is particularly ill in Pakistan and the treatment is not available in Pakistan, he goes to Dubai or to London. He can come here where he can speak to people. There will be a nurse who can speak to him, and okay, so Urdu and Hindi have diverged over the last 67 years. They used to be mutually comprehensible. Now Akashwani and All India Radio here and Radio Pakistan there have made the two languages mutually incomprehensible. but there's still a lot more comprehension there than there is between, say for example, for an illiterate person or a less literate person from Pakistan. It's easier to ask for chai than to sort of worry about how to talk to a doctor or a nurse in English, so people could come for treatment, education. I mean, the number of students who should be in both countries, it would enhance the understanding of each other. Look, most prosperous countries in the world today are the ones whose closest ties are with their neighbors. What are America's biggest trading partners? Canada and Mexico. Where does labor come into America from? From Mexico. What are we trying to do in Pakistan that our historic relationship, our cultural relationship, and even our geographic relationship, our geographic relationship is with our eastern neighbor, and yet our largest trading partners are thousands of miles away from us. That is not the recipe for our prosperity. Now, you've done very well in certain areas, but you also would benefit much more. Your ports are clogged. You are about to, as you expand, Pakistan has 2 or 3 ports that are very free right now because there isn't much activity there. We have overcapacity in our ports. If imports for India could come on Pakistani ports and then come through trains into India, life would be pretty easy for you as well. And so we can then forget about overcoming the disputes and let the dynamic of prosperity settle in. For example, right now there is no strong constituency in India. I mean, the efforts of individuals who have the Pakistan-India Forum, etc., notwithstanding, I appreciate that, but there's no massive constituency. But if there's an economic relationship and a cultural relationship, etc., the beneficiaries of that will be the automatic lobby. Just like in America, now there's a strong China lobby. Where did it come from? So everybody who is an importer of Chinese products or an exporter to China or has investment in his project from China or is invested in China, they all want good relations with China. They correct the course of the politician. If similar situation exists between India and Pakistan, there will be a strong constituency in Pakistan of the beneficiaries of the economic relationship who will then say, you know what, we don't want trouble. We don't, these troublemakers who cause problems between our two countries are not worth the trouble. And that would change the dynamic between us. I hope I have elaborated it much better now than I did from the podium. Sorry.
Thank you, Ambassador Haqqani. Dr. Venkat from St. Joseph's College, I teach international relations too. I just wanted to know your perspective on the role of violent non-state actors, especially operating in and around Pakistan and Afghanistan.
Do you foresee them hijacking the direction of bilateral relations in the future, considering the situation in Afghanistan, and especially the concern that we have in India when it comes to drug trafficking and small arms proliferation? Thank you.
Look, non-state actors are a global reality, but states need to cooperate with each other in restraining non-state actors instead of using non-state actors against each other. I think that is the most cautiously worded statement that I can make on the subject. So states need to cooperate in restraining non-state actors instead of using them against each other. And I think very, I mean, the non-state actors threaten Pakistan much more than they threaten any of Pakistan's neighbors. I mean, the jihadis are a nuisance for India, but they are a threat for Pakistan. They are a challenge for Afghanistan, but they are a threat for Pakistan. Because what is their ideology? Their ideology is a particular brand of what they deem to be Islam. So if they decide to do what ISIS is doing, and they say we want to do it in Pakistan, then who will be affected most? The state of Pakistan. And therefore it is in the interest of the state of Pakistan to cooperate with every other state in the neighborhood and beyond to restrain the non-state actors. Unfortunately, instead of restraining the non-state actors, some people have chosen to use non-state actors against other states. And that is a recipe for disaster. For the reporters taking notes, please, you get the exact words. It's a recipe for disaster for states to use non-state actors against each other.
I see a number of hands are raised, but then I don't want to tax Ambassador Haqqani's throat too much.
No. I'm happy. I'm happy to let my throat be taxed as long as people don't start yawning. And I would like some younger people to ask.
Can we have from there first?
Good evening, sir. So I'm from St. Joseph's College. I'm a first year for the Master's Political Science. So you said that India-Pakistan relationships have always been on this diplomatic dance, and in the past year we've seen that there have been so many, ceasefire violations and cross-border firings. And because of this also so many controversies and statements come up from different rulers from both the countries. So what do you think, what are the measures we can take to resolve such conflicts so that we can improve relations between the two countries?
So first of all, as I said, if both sides are very clear that they need to cooperate with one another in maintaining the sanctity of the line of control and the international border, then there wouldn't be incidents like this. These incidents are part of the bigger problem, which is the desire to change the status quo through non-state actors. And the ceasefire violations essentially are just an extension of that problem. It's more important for both sides to cooperate in maintaining the sanctity of the line of control and the international border. Both sides must cooperate. Sir?
My name is Anand. I'm from the St. Joseph's College, first year political science. You said you were highlighting about the fact that we need to distinguish between the narratives of history and foreign policy. But the fundamental problem here is the ideological differences between both the nations. It goes back to a lot of things like ethnicity, then religion. Then how is it even possible to distinguish? Because the atrocities which has been occurred because of these ideological differences is immense.
So first of all, yeah, it's a good question. Let me just say, first of all, on the subject of ethnicity, Pakistan has 5 major ethnic groups. The Pashtuns, their ethnicity overlaps with the Pashtuns of Afghanistan. The Baloch, their ethnicity overlaps with the Baloch of Iran and Afghanistan. The Punjabis, their ethnicity overlaps with Punjabis in India. And the Sindhis, who also overlap with a lot of people in India, and the Muhajirs, who are actually people whose families moved from here to Pakistan. So, a lot of them from Bihar, but there is also a Mysore colony in Karachi, by the way. There are people who actually moved from here. So, I mean, and when I was young, and some of these people had not started moving to America and Britain, you could actually, there were Marwadi restaurants. You could actually have dosa and uttapam in Karachi. Karachi was a sort of polyglot city. I had children with me in junior school whose first language was Tamil. So it was from everywhere, because different, from Bihar people moved to Bangladesh more, and then came from Bangladesh to Pakistan. But anyway, going back, that your DNA will be from sort of, some caste or some group in India, then it is going to be Arab DNA. It's a contrived difference. Now comes the so-called ideological difference. Point is, if you look at the history, what was happening in the 1940s? The British were about to leave. Everybody knew that they could not stay. Two political parties offered two different programs. One tried to consolidate the vote bank of one community, because the voting system was geared towards that. You had separate electorates, so people from one community could not vote for representatives of the other community. That's how the system was structured. It's very interesting that on 11th August 1947, when Pakistan had been announced and it was about to get its freedom in 3 days, Mr. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, known as the Qaid-e-Azam to Pakistanis, the great leader, he addressed the Pakistani Constituent Assembly as its president. And in his speech he said, the creation of Pakistan solves the constitutional issues that had held back the independence of India. That was his point of view. Of course, in the election, everybody says many things. So the Muslim League had said many things, Congress had said many things, Muslims who were in the Congress had said many other things. But that's how Mr. Jinnah saw it, a solution to the constitutional problem. Then he said in that same speech that we will be two countries, but despite that, both of us will be looking after our own people. And over time, the difference between Hindus and Muslims and Christians and Sikhs would disappear, not in the religious sense, but as citizens of the state. So what was he talking about? He thought creating a Muslim majority state and a state where Muslims are in a minority would somehow give more leverage to his community politically. A bit like some of your politicians try to divide up states, etc., etc., this language group, that. It was politics. The ideology that is hardline was born after the violence during partition, which caused a virtual cleansing of Pakistan. What is today Pakistan should have had at least 1/5 Hindu, Sikh and Christian population. 1/5. But the massacres of partition meant that they all moved across the border. So Pakistan now has only 3% non-Muslims. India's percentage didn't change. But if you notice, East Punjab, which is Indian Punjab, has a very small percentage of Muslims compared to what it had before 1900. Now, if your generation is sensible, you can actually sit down and reconcile these portions of history. It is not affecting your life in a day-to-day. It's not like every Pakistani wakes up every morning and thinks, how do I destroy India? Or he's worried about earning his bread and butter. And none of you wake up. I mean, if you didn't know you were coming to hear me speak today, you wouldn't even have given thought to Pakistan today all day. You would have been worried about what you're going to watch on television, which young lady you're going to try and take out for coffee. Those would have been your thoughts. What are you going to do with your exams? So these ideologies are actually contrived ideologies that are driven for political purposes. If we had real leaders on both sides, they would actually stop breeding hatred. Hatred is learned. Remember this. No one is naturally hateful. Remember this. This is not just a Bollywood film situation. child at age 1 kidnapped, and Hindu child brought up as a Muslim child brought up as a Christian. No, it's a reality. No one is born with hate in their head or their heart. Hatred is learned. It's taught. And so if you stop teaching the hatred, Belgians speak French, French speak French, Belgians speak Dutch, Dutch speak Dutch. Yet the Belgian and the French don't hate each other on a daily basis. They disagree with each other on beer and cheese. And the Belgians get very upset if you call them French. But that's about it. And that's where we can reach there too. Instead of thinking on those terms, there's much more commonality. Look, there's 67 years of partition. But there is several centuries of shared history. The first time I arrived in Delhi, which is where my family is from, by the way. My father was born, raised in Delhi, and his preceding generations were from Delhi. I had heard so much about Delhi from my father that when I entered Old Delhi, I was telling the car driver which way to turn. I had never set foot in that city. I had just heard from my father. When you enter Turkman Gate, then on the right, that's where our house was, that was where Ghalib's house was, etc. And so I was never brought up with that hate. And so my attitude was very different. Somebody else could have been told there were massacres, there was blood, etc., etc. Yeah, well, that was there 6 or 7 years ago. There's much more ahead. There's much more ahead. Instead of thinking purely in terms of ideology, we need to think in terms of prosperity. What is the ideology of European nations today? What is the ideology of South Korea? What is the ideology of Taiwan? What is the ideology of Japan? Why can't we transcend all that? And why can't we aim for prosperity, success, while keeping our various and respective religions?
Somebody had a question.
Made when you said it was a political solution, a constitutional solution of Jinnah.
It was seen as a political solution by Mr. Jinnah.
Yeah, but it took them more than 8 years to form their constitution.
Exactly. Because after the creation of Pakistan, the debate started as to should Pakistan be a secular state or should it be an ideological state. And Pakistan's leaders opted for ideological state, which has harmed Pakistan. And so what I'm talking about is Pakistan becoming a pragmatic functional state. And India also remaining a pragmatic functional state, because that's also important. It could be the reverse. There's a famous Urdu sher that main hua kafir to wo kafir Musalman ho gaya. So those of you who understand Hindi, so don't let that happen. Okay, we struggle to make Pakistan secular instead of ideological, then you decide, no, we are now about to become an ideological state. Please don't do that.
I have the mic.
Sorry. I have to defer to the Air Force.
Thank you. Ambassador, we met a little earlier as well. I stayed in Pakistan for 4 years. Obviously, I have some impressions. But what you've said today is one of the sanest talks I've heard. It's always been very radical from both sides. However, I wish to indulge you a little bit more. Why don't you give us a recipe of how things should happen? And I have no fight with that whatsoever. Am I audible? Or? However, may I ask you a question which is, I don't know whether you'd like to answer it here or not, that's your prerogative. You are very close to Nawaz Sharif. You've been very close to him. You have also, I told you I still have that paper with me, where you tried to talk sense into him when General Wahid Kakkar was kicking him out.
1993.
That is correct. I was there in Islamabad at that time. He has suffered the army again with Musharraf did that. So it's unlikely he's going to buck the army third time. Indians, some of them do believe, and the Pakistani government in being does try and convince us that the civilian government is in absolute control, which you've of course corrected. Well, these very thoughts that you've told us, I personally agree with them. This is the way forward. Have you spoken to Nawaz Sharif about this? Have you tried to guide him? and others who you know so well? And if you have, what is their reaction to it?
Let me say that I haven't, first of all, I don't guide anyone who is not interested in my guidance, so so I haven't spoken to Mr. Sharif lately. I articulate my point of view to everyone in Pakistan. And there are a lot of people who agree. I think right now the problem is how do we get from point A to point B? There's an internal political struggle. Civil-military relations are still finding their equilibrium. I see my role and the role of others like myself to continue to keep the debate alive, because politics moves forward through ideas and debates. I mean, look at your leaders right now, the leadership. The political party that has won a landslide majority in the current election, barely 18 years ago, it had only 2 seats in parliament. So it took 18 years for a point of view to percolate, go through, etc., and it changed. So what I'm looking at is not just, some whisper in Mr. Nawaz Sharif's ear and then he says, and then magically he does everything. I'm looking at changing that whole perception. Some Pakistanis have created this ideological mold. Somebody else needs to break it. And that's what we are doing at the moment. It'll take a few years to percolate. But there are a lot of Pakistanis who do think like this now, As I said, for every Hafiz Saeed, there is somebody who has a different perspective and who offers a different worldview. Because after all, it is hurting. The country is hurting from... Look, I'm just going to give you a very interesting factoid. There is something called a global visa ease or ease of travel ranking of nations. If you have a Pakistani passport, which I have, which is the only passport I have, do you realize the ease of travel means how many countries in the world can you go to without having to obtain a visa? Pakistan is amongst the countries whose citizens can go to the least number of countries without a visa. North Koreans, who are not allowed to travel abroad by their government, North Koreans, if they were to be able to travel outside, if their government allowed them, can go to 3 more countries without a visa than Pakistanis can. That's not a very good situation. Kuwait, Qatar have barred Pakistanis from being employed as, labor, etc. So there is a whole thing going on within our country. And my hope, if any, is based on that somehow there will be a recognition that this paradigm that we have had in the past has not served us well. Mr. Nawaz Sharif has said some good things, and I hope that he will implement them. But as I said earlier, this is not about whispering in his ear and persuading him, because there are others also who are trying to do that in different directions, and that is not a game worth playing for the entirety of your life. Been there, done that, as the Americans say.
One question there from the lady there.
Good evening, sir. My name is Sumaya. I'm from St. Joseph's College. So we do share a lot of historical and cultural affinity. If you could please tell us, post-partition, how did Pakistan go about creating history? Because we have our roots rooting from the Hindu origins. We had the Guptas and the Mauryas ruling us. So how did Pakistan go about filling those gaps with history? Thank you.
Well, actually, it's gone through 3 different phases. Initially, it wasn't that bad. And then slowly, basically, the history was airbrushed. And instead of accepting Pakistan's South Asian roots and origin and connecting Pakistan to its Indus Valley civilization roots, we, or some of our, especially our dictatorships like General Ziaul Haq's dictatorship, started creating an artificial connection with the Middle East. In fact, there was a funny time when General Zia was ruling Pakistan. We used to have an Arabic news bulletin on national television. Hardly anybody in Pakistan watched it, and hardly anybody understood it, because we don't speak Arabic. So it's been an attempt to try and change that. And I think what we need to do is keep those, the historic historically accurate narrative alive, so that people recognize. I don't know if you're familiar with this and if the media here reported it, but Benazir Bhutto's, Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto's son Bilawal Bhutto Zardari recently celebrated what was known as the Sindh Festival, in which he emphasized the roots of the culture and its connection to the Indus Valley civilization, the whole Gupta Maurya period, the Buddhist ancestry of the Gandhara civilization, etc. And although he's only 25 years old, and of course there must have been a political component to this effort, but he was trying to make the argument to the people of Pakistan that, there's no advantage in being wannabe Arabs, as the Americans would say, wannabe Arab. We are who we are. This is where our relationships are. This is where our historic ties are. And we need to rebuild those in the minds of the people. It will take time, because undoing the harm of bad education always takes much longer. But I think that if that process is honestly pursued, some of the prejudices that have been created out of it will be relatively easily eradicated. But so the answer to your question is that they have built a narrative of history that is inaccurate and is taught in schools, but there are others who challenge that narrative as well.
We have 3 more questions because we have. My request is please keep your questions brief to the point. 1 year, Colonel Pillai, and here in front. Yes.
Ambassador, my name is Dinesh Kumar. I was born in Pakistan, by the way. When I read you and when I hear you, I see hope. But I'm reading a book right now in which you are quoted. The book's title is Fighting to the End. And the author says that even if J&K is given on a silver platter, nothing will change from Pakistan point of view.
From the Pakistani military's point of view.
Pakistan military point of view. Because it is not the war over J&K, it is the war of civilization, war of ideology, war of believers and non-believers. It goes on to say, even if Pakistan gets defeated, they consider it as a victory because I have bled India. Now, has that person taken an extreme view? That author has taken the extreme view? In the book you are also quoted. What will be your comment?
Actually, I am not just quoted, I am on the blurb. I have endorsed the book. If you see it on the back cover, I have endorsed the findings of the book.
You have endorsed, because I am on the page 68 still.
Okay. So
and therefore,
if you just look at the back cover, I don't know which edition you are reading.
It's the e-version of the book, and therefore.
Okay. So anyway, look, it's a very good research book, Fighting to the End by Christine Fair. Christine is a very dear friend of mine, and it's important to understand that that is what the Pakistani military teaches its own officers. But the military usually operates in a social and cultural environment. I am sure that there were Indian generals and officers also who said, these bloody civilians, why are they governing it? But there was no constituency for them in this country to be able to do anything like what happened in Pakistan. It must be understood. So most people want the Pakistani military to change. I say that the best way to change Pakistani military is to change the operational environment, because you can't change them like this. You can't just go to the Pakistani military and say, change your worldview, give up your ideology. They have massive interests. They have a nuclear arsenal. They have conventional weapons. They have very powerful stature and status in society, etc., etc. So what needs to be done? The only way to change it is to change the operational environment. Even that book is going to change them. Why? Because when they read it the way she has written it, they will see the absurdity of their way of thinking. I give you, as an example, China. What changed China? 2 things. Mao Zedong's decision to befriend America and Nixon's decision to be part of that. And the second thing was Deng Xiaoping's decision that economic prosperity or economic modernization will precede everything else. Slowly but surely, China has changed significantly. It's still a dictatorship, but it's a much more open society today than it was under Mao, and economically much more prosperous. And the People's Liberation Army, which, like the Pakistani military, has economic interest and this and that, it has kind of trimmed its sails considerably over the years. That is the way forward for Pakistan. With nuclear weapons, it's not possible to militarily defeat them. There are people here who thought after 1971 they will change, but they didn't. Instead of learning a lesson, they doubled down on the old lesson. And similarly, after Kargil, after things like that, you would think they would learn and move on. They haven't. So the way to change them is by changing the overall milieu, because at the end of the day, even a military officer lives among civilians. He's affected by how society thinks. And when this, why don't they take over? Why did Kiani not take over after Musharraf? Kiani knew that Musharraf had become so hated that if another general takes over after him, people will hate him. Yahya Khan didn't think that. When Ayub Khan was about to fall, Yahya Khan thought, if I take over, people will accept me, and they did. So my point is that the milieu needs to be changed, and that will change the institution as well. But what you are reading in the book is absolutely accurate, that the institution does have an ossified way of thinking.
At the center of all these problems lies the self-image of Pakistan. At the core of the Pakistani psyche, what is the self-image of Pakistan? Does it look upon itself as an Arab Pakistan, a South Asian Pakistan, a Central Asian Pakistan, an Islamic state only for Muslims, or a secular state? Firstly. Secondly, what is at the core of the psyche, of the military psyche? Their self-image, the civil society self-image. Now I know there's a lot of difference between the Punjabi psyche, the Sindhi psyche, the Pashtun psyche, and the Baluchi psyche. So in all these, what is at the core, if you can differentiate between them, of the psyche? What is the self-image? Arab Pakistan, I mean...
It has varied over years. I mean, Ziaul Haq tried to create a more Arabized Pakistan. Under the civilians, that kind of diminished a little bit. Musharraf, just by one decision of Musharraf, changed things a little bit. Musharraf allowed Bollywood movies to be shown in cinemas. Changed things a little bit, because that is more common. We understand the same language, we follow that. The military has a slightly more regimented psyche, and their view is much more of an ideological Pakistan, an Islamic nation which must be treated by the rest of the world as being equal to India. That's their view. But the average Pakistani, again, there are multiple psyches there, and successive governments have tried to teach people different things. So the psyche is still being shaped, because after all, it's only a 67-year-old country. So the self-image, I mean, there are those who would view Pakistan as the citadel of Islam, and there are those who would say, I just happen to be here geographically, so I'm a Pakistani. I have no other nationality, and this is the country I know. I was born here. Now I want this country to function. I want it to provide me bread, clothing and shelter. I want it to provide my children education. I want it to be a normal country like every other country. So the self-image of Pakistan is in different parts and in different and varies. The state of Pakistan has consistently tried to make Pakistanis believe that Pakistan was meant always to be an Islamic state or a laboratory for Islam.
I'm Kodan Ramaya. I was a member of parliament in 11th Lok Sabha. In the Standing Committee on External Affairs, there were certain points discussed when Mr. Gujral was the Prime Minister. One suggestion made by me and another member of the parliament was, as was suggested by my friend, why can't you make the line of control to be the international border? And then my argument those days was, I supported that argument, and I said, you had two Bengals. You had two Punjabs, you had two Sindhs, can't you have two Kashmirs? I personally feel India can never take over what we call the Pak-occupied Kashmir, and equally Pakistan cannot take over Indian Kashmir. Something has to come up diplomatically to recognize this fact and see whether this could be thought of as a long-term solution for Kashmir, number one. Number two, at present, can we start the dialogue at which it was left in 1972 in Simla and in Agra? From there can we proceed? And as far as leapfrog is concerned, a leap in the relations, can't we decide Siachen and Sir Creek in a short span of time? I personally feel they are the easiest issues to be tackled between the two countries. And if these two issues are sorted out quickly, can't we have a fillip for further improvement in the relations? Lastly, I find that the rightists in India as also the rightists in Pakistan. You have got the Muslim League there and you have got the BJP here. Both are rightist parties. It looks as if they vibe better and things may improve. And Mr. Nawaz Sharif is doing exceedingly well, and we have had a hope that Mr. Modi also will do well from whatever things we have heard and seen in the future for improving the relations of these two countries.
To the first part of the question, Mike, short answer. Okay, we can take the other question also.
I'm Admiral Jacob. Mine's a very short question, really. I think you've covered what I would consider as a vast framework, which I think is very worth working on. I only have one point to say, that apart from the people-to-people contact which we need to increase, this people-to-people contact is now going on between retired military also. I would say it may not be a bad idea to slowly, very slowly involve the active military. Today we have disputes with China, but today the Indian fleet is operating, has done exercises with China. In the past, Pakistan Navy has done exercises during joint exercise training, went off very well. So I think since the real key to the whole issue is the Pakistan Army, armed forces, I think some kind of tentative moves I think could be made to bring in a slightly more of understanding that nobody in the Indian armed forces is really looking to gobble up Pakistan. And similarly, I'm sure, and people-to-people contact is the only way that will be. Because I know, I have met many Pakistani officers during my career, and I can tell you most of the time we got on famously. I was in Iran as naval attaché. I had an Akbar Husain Khan, who was the naval attaché. We used to get on famously. So I think we could, it's a little early I would say, but I think this could be part of your great leap forward, which I think sounds pretty good. Thank you.
Well, Admiral Jacob, your suggestion I think is just a sort of part of the discussion we were talking about. But I would go back to what you said about, look, the premise is that somehow the problems between the two countries are because of Kashmir. And my argument is that that's not true. I say that the reason is what I call the psychological factor. So the more you put in effort into trying to resolve the dispute, it's like if there's a bad relationship, and the bad relationship is not because she didn't make good breakfast, it's because the relationship is bad for some other emotional reason, then the breakfast is just an issue. So this attempt to try and solve these manifestations of the problem and putting total energy into them has not been fruitful. The famous Soren Singh Bhutto talks was about similar lines. In fact, at that time, Soren Singh was willing to give a lot more territory. Nehru had agreed to do that. But the Pakistani side turned around and said, we don't want that territory, And no, I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about his answer. Your question I've already dispensed with. I agree with your suggestion if somebody can make it happen. Two defense attaches being able to get along famously is much easier. Both can eat and drink at each other's home, drink more than eat, especially if they are from the Navy. Those suggestions have never been sort of fully appreciated by one side. But I was answering the other questions about why can't we have the LOC sorted out and all. You will have to come to that after you have already set aside the parameter of permanent enemy, etc., etc. Because that is not the cause that is there. As the gentleman quoted from Christine Fair's book, even if you gave Jammu and Kashmir, they would find something else because it's a more ideological approach. So don't spend too much time and energy on the symptoms, go for the cause. And the cause is a feeling that somehow the partition was not sufficient for Pakistan. We didn't get what we should have got. And in any case, we have to be India's equal. And yes, there is an equality in sovereignty and the international context, but beyond that, Belgium and France are not equal. Canada and the United States are not equal. Mexico and the United States are not equal. So sometimes it's about accepting the realities and then dealing with them and recognizing each other with full respect, but overcoming also certain hangovers from the past. Every time I meet people here, I don't see many Indians nowadays thinking about what can we do to undo partition. Very frankly, if tomorrow, just as you said, that if somebody offers, supposing Pakistan decided, okay, we want to rejoin the Indian Union, how many people here are willing to accept that? No, not many. A few people in Punjab on condition that they are given back their family homes in Rawalpindi. Other than that, I don't see many. The truth of the matter is that it's something that happened. But both sides insist on a particular narrative of what happened. It's like a bad marriage, to say it. She can't forgive him for not letting the divorce be nicer. And he can't forgive her for wanting to leave him in the first place. And so both are nasty to each other over that. There is no need to that. It's about going beyond that and understanding that we have family, we have children, and their future depends on us getting along. And then we will also be able to solve these in a more pragmatic manner. Just to give you a final example, Germany and France. Germany and France did not resolve Alsace-Lorraine first. Germany and France understood after the Second World War, although unfortunately that had to be achieved with a lot of violence, but Germany and France acknowledged, at least West Germany acknowledged, that we have to get along with France, and we live in a very small geographic area, and we have economic interests with one another, and this is not a zero-sum game. It's not like I get everything or I get nothing. There's things to be shared. There's prosperity to be shared. There's knowledge to be shared. There's learning to be shared. There is healthcare and educational opportunities to be shared. And there are modern technologies that both sides can share. And then we need not think about undoing historic realities. What we need to think about is moving beyond them into the future together as neighbors and partners. Thank you all very much.
My immense thanks to Ambassador Haqqani. He's covered a very, very wide canvas. And I think the type of interest he created with a very practical talk which he has given. The talk was shorter than the question and answer. The question and answer were many with this one. I have great pleasure in now a token of our honor and thanks. Thank you very much indeed. Such a pleasure.